Hey Reefers, I'm Reefer Matt and welcome back to the Reef Cave. Today I want to talk about reef safety. So this isn't a video that I want you to just skip through real quick and just find the little bits and pieces that you want to watch. I'm not going to be showing a lot of coral and stuff in this video. This is for you and this is for your safety. To start off with, I'm going to start off with biological safety. You can see these guys here. We'll talk about them and we'll talk about what you can do to stay safe from them and also maintaining your tank. And also we'll talk about electrical safety and we'll talk about different hazards with that as well. So what I mean about safety is I mean your safety, not so much the safety of the inhabitants of the tank, even though they will be covered in that as well. As you can see, I got a lionfish right there. Obviously with lionfish or any other like the fox face over there, you want to keep your hands clear of any of their spines because you can get spiked by their spines. So you want to keep your hands clear of those when you're feeding your fish or you're cleaning your tank. Also pufferfish, they have little beaks and if they bite your fingers, they can bite the tip of your finger off. Same thing if you have a large trigger. So just make sure that you're keeping your hands out of their way so you don't get pieces bit off. On a personal matter, something that happened to me when I was cleaning my neighbor's tank. I was moving some rocks around. I didn't have any gloves or anything on, and I was grabbing the rocks and moving them, and there was verminid snails on the rocks, and they cut my hands underwater. And I noticed that I had my finger, it was kind of swelling up a little bit the next day. I didn't think much of it. I just, I washed it out real good, and I put some antibiotic on it. What happened was eventually it went away. But it went into my body and in my lymph node system, and the swelling popped up somewhere else. And I noticed that, and I went to the hospital, and I ended up on IV antibiotics for 3 days. And what happened was they told me that had I not gone in, that infection could have went to my heart, and I could have had some serious complications from it. So I suggest if you're going to be moving rocks around and you know they're sharp, get some of them gloves on, them underwater gloves. They got ones that go up to your elbows, and use those to move your rocks around. Or grab some tongs. If it's smaller rocks, you can grab some of them grabbers and move them around. Using your bare hands, you're taking a chance of getting a cut and getting an infection, because we all know that reef tanks and these tanks behind me, a follower tank, they run off of bacteria, and you don't want that bacteria in your body. And another thing to go along with biological safety is when you're cleaning your skimmers or doing your tank maintenance, make sure to put some gloves on and wash your hands real good when you're done, because there's lots of bacteria that are in those protein skimmers, and they also collect in your pumps. So just make sure that you're cleaning your hands, before you eat or something like that, because that's another way to introduce bacteria into your body. So now we know to stay away from these guys and wash our hands and keep our hands clean. Let's look at electrical safety. Alright, so here we have a tank just plugged into the wall. No GFCI, no ground probe. As you can see, there's minimal protection. All you're relying on is the breaker in your house. Fire and electrical shock can still occur. And it's possible when you're reaching your hands into the tank, because you become the ground. Up next is no GFCI with a ground probe. This doesn't gain you any protection. It'll remove the stray voltage, but if there is a short circuit in the tank, it will electrify the tank because you do have that path to ground. I do not suggest using a ground probe if you do not have a GFCI. Alright, up next is a GFCI configuration. I highly suggest everyone have their tanks on a GFCI. This does not have a ground probe in this configuration, but at least this will protect you from fire and from electric shock. Up next is the configuration I have in all my reef tanks. That's a GFCI with a ground probe. What this does is protects you and the tank. It'll get rid of the stray voltage with the ground probe. Any short circuit will turn off the power through the GFCI. This will create a situation, however, that if there is a short circuit, it'll turn the power off to the tank. So I suggest having some kind of alarm to notify you when that happens, so that way you can address the situation and not have your tank without power. Afterwards, you can find out what the faulty equipment is and remove it by unplugging one thing at a time and resetting the GFCI and see which one tripped it. So after seeing all that, I imagine some of you have some questions. such as, well, that's great with the GFCI, but I don't know how to wire things in, and it's kind of expensive to hire a guy to do it. Well, don't worry. They actually make ones that you can plug in, just like this. This one's cool because it's got different outlets on it. You got 5 outlets instead of the 2, and it just plugs into one. So as long as you don't exceed your amperage rating of your breaker on this, you can use this. With the ground probe, I'll show you that for those who aren't familiar. What it is just a little plug. It plugs in the wall. If you're overseas, I imagine it'll have a different plug configuration than this. But these are plastic right here where the conductors will normally go. And then there's your ground. And the end that goes in the tank, that's kind of dirty. I got to clean it. This is titanium. This goes into the tank. So that way it gives you a good path to ground. So with this and with this is if there's a short in your equipment, such as your heater gets a crack, or if your pump shorts out, if you have an AC pump, this will complete the circuit to help trip this. But you got to remember that it's a good idea to have an alarm, so that way you know if that happens. So far, knock on wood, I haven't had an issue in the 5 years that I've had these on my tanks. So I know some people are a little leery. They don't want that GFCI popping off all the time and turning their tanks. It shouldn't be doing that. If it does that, that means there's something wrong with your equipment, and you need to look at that. Usually with the induced voltage situations, this ground probe will ground out any induced voltage. Usually you see that with AC pumps, but with DC pumps you might see a little bit of induced voltage as well. So you might want to take a look at that with the voltmeter. Check that out. You stick the positive lead into the water, the negative lead into a ground on your outlet, and it'll tell you if you have any induced voltage and if you need to use one of these ground probes or not. But I always suggest using, if you're going to use a ground probe, use it with the GFCI. But no matter what, I suggest using this GFCI because this protects you from fire and it protects you from electric shock. So there's no excuse to not have a GFCI because you don't have to wire one in. I'm Reefer Matt. Thank you for watching and happy reefing.